County-wide, a special presentation of Yavapai Broadcasting News. Join Paul David and Kyle Benedict as they talk with our community's leaders, newsmakers, and people in the know. You'll hear about the hot topics that affect all our lives in Yavapai County. And now here's today's County-wide.
Hello there, welcome to County-wide. I'm Kyle Benedict. Today we are welcoming back a guest who was here a couple months ago, Dr. Mark Shelley. He's a professor of sociology and psychology at Yavapai College. When he was here a couple months ago, we talked about his 2015 research project called Digital Narcotics, the Impact of Personal Mobile Technology on Student Success. And this is something that I'm fascinated with because as we talked about in that first show, everybody has cell phones. A lot of people have tablets as well. Multiple computers at home, whatever it may be. So this is a very interesting topic, and we covered how we're distracted a lot by these devices, and we talked about how it's impacting students sleeping, their attention in class, getting homework done, all kinds of different stuff. And here we're going to focus a little bit more today, the topic on understanding technology generations and how technology is being used by these different generations. So I want to again thank Dr. Shelley for coming in this morning. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So it was a lot we covered in the first show, and that's why we had you come back. So I want to thank you for being here, and we're just going to pick up there. In terms of understanding technology generations, one thing you mentioned in one of your other research projects is analogs, digitals, and internets, I think is the title, part of the title of it. What do you mean by analogs, digitals, and internets? Explain that.
I think when we look at how people use technology, we have to look at what they grew up with. And so there was this division that people made starting in the mid-90s about digital natives and digital immigrants. And supposedly digital natives like yourself have grown up with technology, and digital immigrants are those of us who the digital part of the technology came later in our lives. And actually this was perpetrated by people who were pushing video games and video game developments, and they basically said, be afraid of your kids, they have more knowledge than you do, and so when they want something, let them buy it. Of course, this is a great marketing ploy for video companies. But in my research, I discovered that dichotomy, although there was some truth in it, it was much more complicated and nuanced than that. And so what I found is that basically we have three groups of people in the way they use technology, and it's not so much boxes, but a continuum. So analogs, like myself, you know, the clock with the hands on it. Right. We grew up in an age where we didn't have technology. We went from electric typewriters. You know, I remember in high school, my reward for being the fastest typist was to use our one electric typewriter. You know, and then digitals, like my children, in their mid-30s now. They grew up when AOL was just coming about. And so in high school, they were exposed to this. They didn't grow up with it a lot, but in high school, the kind of mobile technology, digital online started coming. And then the internets, they've always had the internet. They've always had mobile technology with them all the time, always on. And so analogs, I found out, you look at technology as tools. So these are how they get things done. And when I deal with older students, they says, wow, how do you do this? How do you do this? How do you do a database? How do you do a search? How do you do? And so they look at it as tools. Digitals tend to look at it as communication, including, and we can talk about this if you want, but helicopter parents using technology to surveil their kids.
Right.
And internets, however, see technology as entertainment. They've never had to program anything. They've just had to push buttons, but they see it as a way to entertain themselves.
Yeah, what's amazing about that, and when you break it down with the different generations and the primary uses of technology, is that everyone has access to the same resources with technology. It just seems like it depends on how you decide to use it.
Right.
And so when you look at entertainment for people under 30, under 35, something like that, they can use their devices the same way as, say, people who were born around 65. Now, how do we find that balance, I mean, between entertainment and using it as a tool?
I think that's difficult because technology companies are making their money off entertainment. Anything that can draw us in. They did a really interesting thing where they did what's called a functional magnetic resonance imaging, when you go into the hospital and get the MRI. And they did MRIs on people who were on drugs, cocaine, and they did MRIs on people who they were on their cell phones and they took away their cell phones during the experiment, and they found that the brain activity mimicked each other. So you could barely tell who was on cocaine and who had their cell phone taken away. And so there's an addictive nature to the entertainment aspect of our technology. And that's where the companies are making money. So I think it's going to be hard.
Yeah, I think the terms digital native and digital immigrant is very interesting because it kind of puts it into perspective. And I think you even talk about it in one of your PowerPoints about you have technology was created by the digital immigrants, as we label them, if we're using those labels. But digital natives supposedly are the ones that grow up with it and supposedly know how to use it better, or I guess can do more on mobile, certain technology, certain devices. And you talked about how the marketing aspect of it, that's really interesting. But are you seeing in the classroom, are you seeing that in the classroom with your older students versus some of your younger students, the way they use it?
Absolutely. I did a little survey in a class this week, and I said, how many of you know what a database is? 2 students raised their hand. How many of you have ever programmed? 1 student raised their hand. And so kind of the background, the formation, the way technology works is foreign to internets. They know how to access stuff, they know how to use apps, they know how to sit around the cafeteria and watch Netflix, but they don't know how to manipulate technology. Instead, they're being manipulated by technology.
That's very interesting. And they're constantly connected to this networked world.
Constantly.
And, you know, I don't want to bring up, you know, a lot of the stuff nationally, and you know, we can get into the politics of it and whatnot with social media, but you have this wealth of information. You have this place you can go, the internet, where you can find anything that you want. Something that would have taken you years to research, to go in a library. Geez, go to a library, right? And all of a sudden, that's at your fingertips. You have access to that same information. I do too. We could right now have a debate and fact check ourselves. But the problem is trying to figure out which, I know when I was in school, they really talked about your resources and citing where you're getting your information from and getting it from a reputable source. You know, which websites are, these are the clues that you look for on, this is a good website to use in a research project. It seems like it's getting more difficult because everyone has access to information. People, you can create whatever story or group you want, put it out there in the internet, and people can flock to you with that same mindset. How do we, as a society or culture, how do you think we try and, the younger generation who's growing up right now with technology and a cell phone in their hand at 10, 11, how do we try and get them to know the difference between this is where you go for information and this is just BS, frankly?
Yeah.
How do you translate that over to a younger kid?
Well, there's this whole field called digital literacy. Just like we have reading literacy and math literacy, and the idea is to teach students this. But part of the problem is that, like you said, the internet is unregulated. So there's all this fake stuff is actually out there.
Right.
And so to teach students how to critically, or people in general, how to critically think through that is difficult because it's all melded. It's all put into one and stirred up. And so, you know, how do you tell fake news? And the other thing is, do people really want to? Or do people go to sites and go to places that agree with their preconceived ideas? Yeah. And so I think what we're seeing now in our current political landscape is people are being divisive, or technology is being divisive, and people are going into their own boxes. If I don't agree with you, I just Google something that agrees with me. Right. And it reinforces my own biases. Right. Instead of exploring other points of view.
And it seems like the future is going to be very interesting to see how things start being regulated, if they are regulated, because there's of course a debate on that as well. So we're going to take our first break. When we come back, we'll continue talking about the way different generations use technology and their mobile devices. That's coming up here. We'll see you in a couple minutes.
Q102.9 plays all the hits.
Yo, what's going on? This is Drizzy Drake.
Ariana Grande.
Maroon 5.
This is Rihanna.
I'm Shawn Mendes.
Hey, it's Bruno Mars.
Ed Sheeran.
What's up, guys? It's Justin Bieber.
You're listening to The Weeknd.
Start your day with Brian James in the morning. You'll get at least 10 songs in a row during your ride home with Julie Page.
Zach Sang Show.
Catch the Zach Sang Show weeknights 7 to midnight. And Kelly Fox weekends on your home for hit music. The Q102.9 and 104.9 in Prescott and Cottonwood.
Have you mixed your pain meds, your sleep meds, your allergy meds? Call the Poison Helpline. Has your child swallowed household cleaner, a chip of paint, a wild mushroom? Call the Poison Helpline. Have you been bitten by a spider, a snake, an insect? Call the Poison Helpline. Poisonings can happen at the home, on the job, or in the great outdoors. Call the Poison Helpline first to speak with medical professionals who can give you free personal advice anytime. 1-800-222-1222. Save the number, save a life.
Hello, I'm Jen Cohen, host of Verde Valley TV's hit TV show, The Verde Valley Experience. On each episode, we feature local organizations, nonprofits, persons of interest, events, activities, and great local musicians. It's informative, it's entertaining, it's fun. It's the Verde Valley Experience.
We meet online, and I tell you, I'm falling in love. I have to see you in person, but I need a loan for the ticket. I really think you're the one. And I really think you're desperate. Sure enough, you send cash and never see me again. Too smart to fall for this? Last year alone, 12 million Americans lost money this way. Can you believe it? You shouldn't. I made that up, too. Might not be as smart as you thought you were.
Welcome back to Countywide. I'm Kyle Benedict, sitting down with Dr. Mark Shelley. He's a professor of sociology and psychology at Yavapai College. For more information about Yavapai College or to try and get in touch with Dr. Shelley, yc.edu, a good website for Yavapai College. A phone number, 928-445-7300. So before we went to break, we were talking about Googling and just the fact that everyone has access. It's almost a level playing field when you kind of look at it in terms of access to internet if you have a mobile device. It's in your pocket. In terms of retaining information, do you see our ability to retain information, is that hindered by basically technology and how accessible technology is?
Let me give you an example of that. In one of my classes this semester, I said, okay, here's a question. I want you to think about it, okay? It was kind of an enigmatic question, didn't have a clear answer. Students reached in their pocket, pulled out their phone, and Googled it. And I said, what are you doing? They said, we're finding the answer. And I said, oh, but what I asked you to do was think about the answer.
Right.
And think about the process. And so what we're doing is we're using technology to shortcut our critical thinking process. And we become a short-term society. It's just what's happening now, what I can find instantly that's important, the historical context, the past, even the future doesn't make any difference. It's the now, it's the present.
Yeah, and the short-term memory, I think, is important. Now, how, as a teacher, you mentioned when you catch a student doing that, you talk to them about it, and why are you doing this? How about we talk about that? Is that, would you say, the best way, in your opinion, to deal with students who have maybe not an issue retaining information, but just don't, it's almost like we don't practice it as much because we constantly have our phone. How do you deal with that as a professor in the classroom?
Well, the way you don't deal with that is to get authoritative and tell people not to.
The way you don't deal with it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because people are going to do it. And so what I do is I appeal to my class, and I have a pretty strict cell phone policy, but I appeal to my students. I says, we have an hour and 15 minutes together. Let's use it to interact. Let's use it to think. Let's put our technology aside for an hour and 15 minutes and just focus on it. And my students have come to me and said, we really appreciate you making us not use our cell phones, because if you didn't, we would be on them. And now we're getting a different kind of experience because we aren't on our cell phone. The average student checks their cell phone at least once every 15 minutes.
Oh yeah, I believe that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, the generation aspect of it, where it doesn't really matter. The use with people who are in their 60s is, I mean, maybe not as frequent, but They use their devices often.
Absolutely.
Now, also one thing that was really interesting in this presentation was you talked about mode of delivery preference by technology generations, and we covered the different generations, but I'm looking at the graph right now, and the most shocking number here, 59% of internets, so people under, say, 35, prefer in-person only classes, 59%, and that, to me, is shocking. Why do you think that is?
I think it's kind of a reaction to being on technology all the time. It's interesting because many students feel, okay, I have my technology and then I have my school, and why is the school trying to interfere with my personal space, which they define as their cell phone? And but I think the other thing is that a lot of students don't have the skills to really effectively use an internet course. Okay, they don't know those technical things. But the other thing is I just think they want to talk to people.
Yeah.
I think they miss the face-to-face. When they have questions, because they're so now-oriented, they'd like a question now. If you do an online course, you send an email to your teacher or put it on a discussion board. Maybe in a day or two or a week, you'll get an answer to that.
Yeah, and you talk about also people admitting basically that they're addicted to their cell phones. People who say they're definitely addicted in terms of the internets, 13% say they're definitely addicted, 54% say they're perhaps addicted to technology. So it seems like when you get people, the younger generation saying, 59% prefer in-person only classes, it seems like they're almost admitting the fact that we are addicted, and if I'm taking a class at home on my laptop, I'm not going to be able to get things done or make the most of that class.
Absolutely, because as we were talking before the show, if you're doing an online class, you have Chrome open, you have Instagram open, you have Facebook open.
The TV on.
Yes, and so you're not focusing. Shelley, a professor of culture and technology at MIT, says there are certain things we can only comprehend if we focus exclusively on those things. And I think that's what we're losing in our society with technology, is the ability to focus for an extended period of time on one particular thing.
Yeah, and I mean, we're just getting started here. I mean, 2007, you mentioned, is when the first iPhone came out?
Right. So we're only a decade into this idea where everybody has everything on them all the time. So it's happening so fast that our research can't even keep up with it.
Right, yeah, and how is this going to affect, kids? I mentioned last show, a couple years ago, we had NAU in here talking about, they're doing studies on how childhood development is impacted by, parents just giving their kid a cell phone or an iPad and the kid staring at it, 3 inches in front of their face, how that is going to impact their social skills and development and all that stuff. Kind of staying on that mode of delivery, digitals, 48% preferred hybrid classes. Now, is that, I look at that number and I just quickly think maybe that's because that gap between the analogs where, it was not much technology, and then now with the internets where it's everywhere, you can do anything on your mobile devices. Do you think that's why they prefer the hybrid, because they know both sides of it?
That may be part of it, but I think it's more life situation. I think if you're looking between people 30, 50, you're talking about parents of young children, people who are really want to further themselves by education, but maybe have daycare problems, or maybe they're working another job. So hybrid classes, where it's part online and part in person, fulfills that need of being connected, but also gives you some flexibility in that time. When I was over at NAU Prescott Valley, we experimented with hybrid classes. And interestingly enough, they weren't as successful as we thought they would be.
Really?
Yes, because students were a bit frustrated for the same things that the internets are frustrated by. They didn't get the kind of response. It wasn't the structure. It wasn't the interaction that they wanted to. So I think it works well for some people in some situations, but we may be guilty in higher education of trying to push it onto everybody.
Yeah, and I think it's good to have the option, just because everyone learns differently. You know? And I think for me, I like to be to at least have the option to ask questions if I would like, or have a professor expand on something that I might not have understood the first time. So we're going to take our second break. When we come back, we'll kind of talk a little bit more about the future and where we see education going to maybe keep up with this trend of just technology on the rise constantly. So that's coming up on Countywide. We'll be back in a couple minutes.
The Q102.9 plays all the hits.
Yo, what's going on? This is Drizzy Drake.
Ariana Grande.
Maroon 5.
This is Rihanna.
I'm Shawn Mendes.
Hey, it's Bruno Mars.
Ed Sheeran. What's up, guys? It's Justin Bieber.
You're listening to The Weeknd.
Start your day with Brian James in the morning. You'll get at least 10 songs in a row during your ride home with Julie Page.
Zach Sang Show.
Catch the Zach Sang Show weeknights 7 to midnight. And Kelly Fox weekends on your home for hit music. The Q102.9 and 104.9 in Prescott and Cottonwood.
I call you and say, I'm with the IRS. You owe back taxes, and if you don't pay today, you're going to jail. You can fix this by sending cash. And you actually believe me? Too smart to fall for it? Well, last year, Americans paid $100 million to guys like me. 1 in 6 people were scammed. Can you believe it? Well, you shouldn't. I just made that up, too. You are a little gullible.
Hello, I'm Jen Cohen, host of Verde Valley TV's hit TV show, The Verde Valley Experience. On each episode, we feature local organizations, nonprofits, persons of interest, events, activities, and great local musicians. It's informative, it's entertaining, it's fun. It's the Verde Valley Experience.
I call you and say, I'm with your son. There's been an accident and he's in jail. He needs bail money, and you actually believe me. So you send cash fast and then bye-bye. Think you're too smart to fall for this? Just last year, 150 million Americans weren't. 1 out of 3 of your neighbors lost $500. Can you believe it? You shouldn't. I made that up too. Maybe you will believe everything you're told.
Welcome back to Countywide. I'm Kyle Benedict. Just a couple minutes left in the program. We're sitting down with Dr. Mark Shelley, professor of sociology and psychology at Yavapai College. So in terms of teaching and the way you go about teaching as technology becomes more and more common, and I imagine technology too, there's ways that it can really help teaching. Is there a debate going on within professors or just academia in general on how to change?
There's a debate, because with technology there's a convenience factor. You can do schooling in your pajamas, but there's also an economic factor. You don't have to have classrooms, you don't have to have facilities, and so a lot of these places like University of Phoenix and Grand Canyon University, they're really capitalizing on that, and they're making a lot of money off the online. The question is, what about the quality of that education? Right. Is that the same quality? A few years ago, we interviewed a person who had graduated from an online school, and it just floored us all what they didn't know. Even though they had a master's degree, they did all their education online. And so something is lost in the translation. And so maybe what we'll do is come to a compromise where some of your education is online and some of it is in person. At the level I teach, at the undergraduate level, I really think face-to-face is going to be better. Graduate programs, I think some kind of blend is probably going to work well.
Yeah, I remember when I was up at NAU, it seemed like there were a lot of professors who, other than laptops, which even then people were on Facebook and stuff on their laptops. You look at them, professor can't see that. But other than that, it was no texting, any of that. But you also hear about tablets being used down in elementary schools and whatnot. So it'll be really interesting to see how all that changes with the times and how technology continues to advance just so quickly. We're out of time. I want to thank you again for coming in today.
My pleasure.
And we'll continue to follow this and probably see if we can get you back in. So I want to thank you again. And that's going to do it for today's Countywide. That's Dr. Mark Shelley, professor of sociology and psychology at Yavapai College. That's today's Countywide. We'll see you next time.